In 2016, Shin Godzilla was released to both critical acclaim and widespread public appeal. But despite being the titular character and the figurehead of the movie, Godzilla is actually not the monster in this film. Japan is well known for its monster stories, from anime to yokai to movie monsters, and worldwide, none stand as tall, figuratively or literally, as Godzilla. With over 40 movies and over 60 years of history, Godzilla has become a titanic icon of Japanese cinema and popular culture. While most Godzilla movies focus on Godzilla's destruction and the horrified screams of the public in response, as they try everything they can to fight the monster, Shin Godzilla takes a bit of a different approach. Now, I don't want this to just be a, oh, mankind was the monster all along kind of video. Instead, I want to offer you a different perspective. Instead of presenting the horrors of the atomic weapons used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki like past Godzilla movies, in Shin Godzilla, his destruction represents government action and a long-standing resentment of the United States. After all, America was the one to hit Japan with nukes in the eve of World War II, exerting total domination over the country and determining the international order for nearly a century afterward. But the stance this movie takes is different. The film shows not only the destruction wrought by Godzilla on Tokyo and the surrounding area, but the political machine working behind the scenes to fight the monster and save Japan. With the CGI monster effects, laser beams, explosions, and destruction, it's easy to get bored at the slow pace of all the meetings, press conferences, and political discussions. But it's in these slower moments, more subtle scenes, that the true thesis of the movie lies. Shin Godzilla is a major FU to the United States and the world order it represents. Not only that, but in its sarcastic yet brutally honest look at Japan's past, present, and hopeful vision for the island nation's future, the film offers a glimpse into the rage felt by many Japanese people at their country's position in the world and their own relationship to it. Now, it's easy to think of Shin Godzilla as just another Japanese monster movie. The amazing monster designs, the race against the clock before the city is destroyed by a hydrogen bomb. It's got all your Godzilla fanfare. People don't care about politics. They want action, giant lizards, and even bigger explosions. People fleeing for their lives, and even a scene of some of the Tokyo citizens worshiping the beast as it goes on a rampage. But it's a reason the movie doesn't actually give the beast that much screen time. And no, it's not supposed to be like the Cloverfield effect, where the less you see the monster, the scarier it is. We actually get a good look early on. It's because the meat of the film, its true message, is in those in-between moments. How does power work? How do the citizens of Japan, the Japanese government, and the United States government decide to tackle the situation? See, Shin Godzilla, unlike most previous titles, focuses much more on the popular, government, and international response to the monster than the monster itself. We start off seeing a passenger ship, emptied of its crew, abandoned in the Tokyo Bay. Immediately, there's a huge gush of water, swallowing the vessel, and some damage is done to an underwater passageway. The government leaps into a response, and in typical bureaucratic fashion, schedule meeting after meeting. The scenes where everyone mobilizes in lockstep to go from one meeting room to another were pretty funny, parodying the rigid Japanese government and corporate structures, while also showing us, the viewer, how inefficient these sorts of processes can be. The movie doesn't frame them that way, however. The protagonist, Yaguchi, gets a word of warning from one of his seniors, telling him not to rock the boat. These standard procedures, while slowing things down, function as a way of preventing a hasty action that might lead to unnecessary fear, panic, and unrest. Early on, Yaguchi actually proposes that it could be a living creature in the bay. But this is immediately mocked, as such a creature would need to have a body temperature exceeding the boiling point of water. Shortly after, however, a live stream of Tokyo Bay on the news reveals a giant tail, showing that it is in fact some kind of never-before-seen monster in the water. Now they have three options: exterminate it, expel it from the bay, or capture it for further examination. In order to determine the best course of action, we have three biologists brought in to consult on the matter, but they're not much help, to be honest. One biologist is more concerned with his reputation than anything, studying a creature that may or may not exist. Another is overly concerned with the details of what kind of creature it could be. And the third is concerned with whether or not this is a real thing in the first place. Trapped in their own hierarchies and their own concerns, they don't have much to contribute, so the government moves on with a plan to eradicate the monster. This hierarchical society, while great for preserving a level of peace and tranquility, have proven incapable of handling this sort of beast, or any sort of calamitous, unforeseen catastrophe. This is something highlighted throughout the movie, as the filmmakers wanted to portray a stagnant, fossilized Japanese society. In my opinion, this is meant to contrast with the beast who, while ancient, clearly demonstrates, as we'll see, an ability to drive its own evolution in real time in response to its wants and needs. Wishing to calm the public, the Prime Minister decides to hold a press conference, telling the citizens of Tokyo that, based on their analysis, the monster is incapable of coming on land, and so because of that, it shouldn't be an issue. Just then, an aide to the Prime Minister comes on stage to let him know that the monster has in fact made landfall and is marching through Tokyo rather quickly. So much for that, right? One of the members of the government complains that all this red tape, all these procedures, get in their way of actually handling the problem. To which another responds, that's the foundation of democracy. The red tape gets even thicker as, in response to the attack, they hold yet another meeting to determine if this incident falls under the prerogative of the Japanese Self-Defense Forces. See, the Japanese Self-Defense Forces were codified in Japan's constitution in 1954, with heavy involvement in the proceedings by the United States, which was wrapping up their occupation of the country after World War II. As a result, they considered leveraging their position with the United States, having them deal with the monster instead. However, one woman worries that it will take too much time for them, as the treaty stipulates that they must first attempt to handle the situation on their own. There are some more concerns that the US response might not be ideal, as we'll get into later. At this point in the movie, we have two threats looming over Japan: the immediately threatening and present monster, and the distant, yet possibly more threatening specter of the United States' dominance over the country. It's not even that they're incapable of handling the situation, but due to their rigid hierarchies and standard operating procedures, they're in gridlock, unable to proceed. This is highlighted in the film by the board members playing a game of telephone, going up the chain of command, rather than speaking to the Prime Minister directly. At this point, the Prime Minister has to make a decision, no matter how reluctant he is to do so. They decide to attack the creature and send in helicopters to strike it from the air. But due to the presence of civilians, they abort the attack, wishing to avoid unnecessary casualties, and of course, the scrutiny that would come with it. The creature then flees back into the water, and the next day is more or less business as usual. The trains run, there's a disaster response, some people are afraid, a lot of people are uncertain, and there's a lot of doubt, but people mostly carry on with their lives as they had done before. At this point, Yakuchi is frustrated and feels that more could be done, but decides to hold off for now. The government then sets up a task force to handle the monster, noticeably discarding rank and title in their deliberations, hoping this will speed up the process. They seem to be learning now that, while their hierarchies and planning have worked well up to this point, it can't get them over this hurdle, and so, like the creature, they must adapt as well. At this point in the film, the US is now highly interested in the creature, and wants more of a say in how it's handled. As their investigation continues, one woman posits that the beast may use some form of nuclear fusion as its energy source. She's mocked at first, but the radiation alarms all over the city begin to go off, right along the trail of the monster the day before. People on social media are concerned, chiming in about the radiation spikes, and it seems like the government risks losing control over the situation. They apologize to her and begin work in seeing what they can learn from the radioactive creature. What started as a simple monster movie quickly becomes a commentary and critique on the rules of engagement, government bureaucracy, and the management of public perception. The Prime Minister speaks with officials from the US who, in typical American fashion, make lots of unilateral, one-sided requests of their government on how to handle this situation without letting them get a word in edgewise. In contrast to the Japanese government, the US government strikes fast and strikes hard, without much consideration for the consequences. We're then introduced to the Japanese-American liaison from the US, Kayako Patterson. She immediately asserts herself in the discussion and would like to see a peaceful resolution of the situation in her beloved grandmother's homeland. From her, we learn that the US Department of Energy has named the creature Godzilla, based on the research from an old Japanese scientist whose legacy looms large in the film. It is explained that the name comes from an ancient deity in his homeland, said to be a wrathful incarnation of a certain god. His research also includes an enigmatic map of chemical isotopes that reveal the secrets of Godzilla, if only they could figure out what it means. We also find out that the reason for American interest in Godzilla comes from a spectrographic analysis of its radiation, indicating presence of undiscovered isotopes and chemical elements that may provide an energy source. Now, for those who don't know, spectrographic analysis is when you look at the spectrum of radiation emitted by a certain source in order to determine which elements are in it. Rather than to help their comrade and ally, the US motivations are primarily self-serving in typical American fashion. The situation with the public develops even further, as some people take to the streets to worship Godzilla, likely due to its name and its history on top of its overwhelming destructive power. Godzilla continues to evolve, now fully capable of living on land. The Japanese self-defense forces try again to combat the beast, hitting it with all types of bullets and bombs, none of which seem to have an effect, so they reach out to the US for military support. The government is concerned, however, that the US is planning a bombing campaign that will cause far more destruction and ruin than the attack by Godzilla, as expected from the US military. The Americans begin their attack on the creature, who fights back with irradiated laser beams from its back and mouth, effectively neutralizing the US air platoon. Godzilla then goes on a rampage, setting many buildings and districts in Tokyo on fire, wreaking havoc and destruction. In fighting back, Godzilla also takes down a helicopter carrying the Prime Minister and several members of his cabinet, leaving a potential power vacuum in the government. It is at this point the US again, unilaterally, decides to bring Godzilla under international, aka United States-led, jurisdiction. They decide the best way to eliminate Godzilla is with a hydrogen bomb, something the Japanese government, of course, finds absolutely unacceptable. The film drives home just how horrendous of a proposal this is, showing the aftermath of the nuclear bombings on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Kayoko wants to avoid this at all costs, as any reasonable person would, but it seems like the US government lacks reasonable people. Who would have figured? The interim prime minister and his acting government reluctantly accept the condition, while Yaguchi and his team desperately seek an alternative. Here, Japan's status as a tributary of the United States is highlighted, being called a quote-unquote post-war measure. But post-war lasts forever, and so Yaguchi expresses his hope that one day the international order will change, and Japan, calcified not only by its own culture, but by the restrictions from its relationships with the US, will one day be able to flourish and chart its own course. Here, a plan to freeze Godzilla with blood coagulants is now being considered as a last-ditch effort to save Tokyo from hellfire. They take another crack at the scientists' research, realizing that it was printed on paper for a reason. It was imprinted on paper so that they could fold it. In my scientific opinion, the lines that they fold the paper along seem to be lines of relationships between radioactive elements, essentially which elements decay into which and how. But this isn't a science class, so I'm not going to get into it. They figure out the chemical and biological makeup of Godzilla, and with this are able to come up with a mixture of blood coagulants that will help them stop the beast. This discovery is groundbreaking. We see Godzilla has control over its own evolution due to its high energetic makeup and, much like the United States, is said to be a creature capable of either global destruction or limitless potential. With the clock ticking down to the nuclear strike, they send the data to a lab with their best friends in Germany to run an analysis on their supercomputers. The Germans agree to help, of course, and they get the results of the Japanese shortly after. Godzilla, having used a ton of energy in its last attack destroying a city, has been lying dormant, giving the Japanese about 2 weeks to get together an alternative plan. They also managed to get an extension from the French, who are a member nation in the United Nations Security Council, giving them the extra time that they need to get the material. They do this, of course, in exchange for research on Godzilla, as France is very heavily invested in nuclear energy, getting approximately 40% of their total energy from it. With that, their operation to freeze Godzilla is underway. They named it Operation Yashiori, after a sake that Susanoo used to put the Yamata no Orochi, a menacing hydra, to sleep. It's quite a fitting name if you ask me. Thus, Japan's final stand, not only against Godzilla, but the United States as well. Their plan is to crash trains wired with explosives into the beast to pin it down so they can drip feed it the coagulant. While Godzilla struggled, of course, they were ultimately successful in freezing it. For now, we learned that the coagulant will only last for a few weeks, and that in that time they must come up with a more permanent solution for the beast. Even though Tokyo lie in ruins, and the interim government resigned immediately after Godzilla was quelled, the film ends on a note of resigned hope. Just as Japan rebuilt itself after World War II, scrapping together what was left and building from that, they will do the same here. And their hope is the new Japan, born from the ashes of Godzilla's fire, will be greater than it was before. Kayoko and Yaguchi talk about government responsibility and how Kayoko aims to become the president of the United States, tightening the relationship between the US and Japan. Yaguchi is skeptical, stating Japan will likely continue to be America's stooge for the foreseeable future. What was once a horrific calamity for Japan has now opened up an opportunity for them to chart their course in the new future that awaits. It reminds me of the Japanese word for crisis, being kiki, where the first character on the left means danger, and the second character coming from the word kikai, which means opportunity. From a dangerous situation, opportunity emerges. A society stuck in its ways for so long, woken up by disaster, now has the chance to respond, and like the magnificent beast Godzilla, will continue to improve and evolve. Through the film, we see the United States government, inconsiderate of their actions in this far-off land, ready to destroy everything as it asserts its dominance. While the film is critical of the initially meek and cautious approach of the Japanese government, the US government's approach is way too far in the other direction. This film shows us that, while Japanese society must move forward, changing perspectives on hierarchy and status, moving too fast, hitting too hard, can cause needless casualties. Japan, unlike the United States, has experience with the true depths of casualty. Not to say that bad things don't happen here in America, but we've never had destruction from a war on this scale in our history. The Japanese government refuses this approach, knowing the fallout, both physically and literally, are not at all preferable to taking a chance against a monster beyond all human comprehension. Japan is world-renowned for its conformity, its harmony, hierarchy, and maintaining face. It's something that I noticed when I traveled there late last year. People are quiet on the trains, the major cities are much cleaner than ours in the States, and the people are very friendly. One origin for this culture of cooperation in Japan that I've seen is the fact that for much of their history, Japan has been plagued with natural disasters. Even a few years ago, there was a tsunami that impacted the Fukushima nuclear plant, leading to widespread destruction and fears of nuclear contamination. And from what I hear, actually, ghost sightings in Japan during this time skyrocketed. Japan is on a major fault line, you see, and 1 out of every 10 of the world's active volcanoes lies on the archipelago. Earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, mudslides regularly rock the country. And from that, the people have learned to cooperate for their survival at a level unseen throughout the rest of the world. And this isn't to say the Japanese government hasn't come under scrutiny in recent years for the same aspects of this civil, cautious society. Many issues plague the country due to its slow-moving government, and many of these issues are further exacerbated by its relationship to the United States. For example, many people know about Japan's decline in population, and its birth rate declines can be tied to various cultural factors, one of which is the occupation and subjugation of the United States. The birth rate has been declining for about 100 years now, but it saw its steepest decline in 1950, right after its war with the United States, at the height of its occupation. The birth rate of Japan saw its lowest point in 1989, infamous for when the Japanese economy came to a standstill. This economic standstill was caused by the bursting of the assets bubble, seeing the value of stocks and real estate go into freefall. There were several causes in the popping of their bubble, but a significant contributor was the Plaza Accord. The Plaza Accord, signed in September of 1985, was an agreement by several countries to devalue the US dollar in response to the rapid growth of the Japanese economy and the skyrocketing value of the Japanese yen, and changes to import and export balances between Japan and other countries. The US, concerned that Japan would have overtaken them as an economic superpower, saw the accord as a way to slow down Japanese growth. The Plaza Accord saw a meteoric rise in Japanese stock prices and real estate values, reaching a point where the real estate value of Tokyo at its height was greater than the real estate value of the entire United States. Obviously unsustainable, unless they find some kind of secret element that no one ever saw underneath all the land in Tokyo. This led to the cratering of the Japanese economy, from which they have yet to recover. Economic slowdown caused greater corporatization of the country, where we now see many people falling casualty to toxic work environments, overwork, and little time for family building. Japan is also home to the most US military bases of any country, which has led to its own issues with US service members harming the local population. While it doesn't seem to me that Japan outright hates America, because there's still a great deal of interest in American culture and visiting the United States over there, they clearly have many reasons to be resentful of their current relationship. By portraying the US as an even greater threat to the country than Godzilla itself, the filmmakers vent these frustrations incredibly. While it's not a subtle criticism, there isn't much that's subtle about the issues plaguing Japan, or their ties to American subjugation of the country. The same way that the Japanese learned to take a more proactive, creative approach to Godzilla. Perhaps this movie can teach us in the US the importance of a more measured, considerate approach to disasters, where we look out not only for one another and our interests, but a sustainable future where even in our blackest hours, there's hope for a better tomorrow. In this video, we went over the critiques of the US-Japan relationship built into Shin Godzilla. But before you call out your neighbor, it's best to clean your own house. And that's just what the Japanese new wave of cinema did in the 1960s. For a discussion on one of my favorite movies by Seijun Suzuki from this time period, the video on screen is a review of his 1966 forgotten classic, Carmen from Kawachi, which through its comedic moments and its dark troubles for the protagonist, paint a vivid picture of gender relations in post-war Japan. See you over there.